To the daughter who truly represents this family's future, my father said, lifting his crystal flute toward the vaulted ceiling of the ballroom at the Riverbend Club in Savannah, Georgia. The room went still. Nearly 200 of coastal Georgia's wealthiest donors, developers, and politicians held their breath. We are transferring the deed to the Marshview estate to Caroline, effective tonight. Applause exploded across the room. Caroline smiled brightly, gripping the arm of her fiancé, Grant, soaking in the approval. Then came the knife. Because a legacy, my father added, his eyes locking onto mine from the stage, belongs to the child who protects the image. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I took a slow sip of champagne and smiled. Because they thought this was a coronation, they didn't know it was an execution. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is right now. I'd love to know who's part of this community. I placed my empty glass onto a passing server's tray and turned away from the podium. I didn't storm out. Storming out is for people who still believe someone will follow them. I walked with the calm, measured pace of a woman closing a deal that had gone bad but was finally finished. As I moved through the crowd, the applause for Caroline thinned, dissolving into the low murmur of conversations restarting. They were drinking champagne I paid for, standing beneath chandeliers I rented, admiring the custom silk gown my sister wore, a $7,000 dress paid for with a wire from my personal account because my mother said liquidity was tight this quarter. For years, I had been the engineer of their illusion. I balanced books in the dark so they could shine in the light. I paid caterers when cards declined, covered deposits when my father claimed transfers were stuck in processing. I was the silent partner in the enterprise of appearing successful. I told myself it was loyalty. That's the trap, isn't it? We convince ourselves we're the strong ones, the dependable ones. But as I walked toward the audio-visual booth at the back of the ballroom, I finally saw the invisible chain that had been tightening around my throat for over a decade. The chain of the survivor isn't made of steel. It's made of hope. The desperate belief that if you just fix one more problem, cover one more bill, make them look good one more time, they'll finally see you as a daughter instead of a resource. You mistake usefulness for love. You believe indispensability equals safety. But tonight, under those lights, the chain didn't snap loudly. It dissolved. I understood that I wasn't saving them. I was financing my own erasure. My father's announcement wasn't betrayal. It was a receipt. He had taken my money, my silence, my labor, and built a pedestal for Caroline on a foundation of debt ready to collapse. He thought he was giving her a legacy. He didn't realize he was handing her a grenade. And I was the only person in the room who knew exactly when the pin had been pulled. I reached the booth. The technician, a young guy in a black polo and headset, glanced up nervously. He knew the plan. I hired him too. He nodded, fingers hovering over the control panel. Behind the stage, a frozen image waited on the massive screen. My parents smiling on their wedding day 32 years ago. The cover frame of the anniversary montage I spent weeks assembling. The guests expected tears, memories, sentimental music. They expected the lie. I opened my laptop. A different presentation glowed back at me. This wasn't a montage, it was an audit. I looked toward the stage one last time. Richard and Elaine were clinking glasses with a state senator. Caroline laughed, blissfully unaware that the deed in her hand was an anchor. I didn't feel guilt. I didn't feel sadness. I felt clarity. I tapped the technician's shoulder and connected my HDMI cable to the main feed. It was time to show them the real cost of doing business. The music cut out first, the string arrangement dying mid-note. Silence swallowed the room. The screen flickered. Guests leaned forward, confused, squinting at the stark black and white document now towering above the head table. This wasn't a photo. It was a scanned PDF. At the top, in bold, merciless text, notice of default. The sound that followed wasn't a gasp. It was air being sucked from the room. The sound of people who recognized that document only from the opposite side of a desk. I stepped out from the shadows and lifted the wireless microphone. It felt heavy, final, like a gavel. I didn't raise my voice. I spoke with the same neutral cadence I used in courtrooms when testifying about misappropriated funds. If everyone could direct their attention to the screens, we have a slight correction to tonight's program. My father spoke about legacy, about image, but tonight it's important to examine the cost of that image. I clicked the remote. The slide changed. This is where the difference between appearance and truth becomes violent. We live in a world obsessed with surfaces. We curate, filter, crop out the damage. But in forensic accounting, there's a rule. Numbers don't have feelings, and numbers don't lie. A photograph appeared. Beautiful. My parents and Caroline in Key West, laughing beneath a painted sunset, drinks raised. The picture-perfect life. It was the definition of success. I looked at my mother, Elaine. Her hand covered her mouth, eyes wide with a fear that was finally real. I said this photo was taken 3 years ago. It earned over 400 likes. It represents the peak of the family brand. But let's look at the ledger. Total cost of the trip, $13,800. Source of funds, 3 consecutive missed mortgage payments on the Marshview estate. I clicked again. The screen split. On the left, the vacation photo. On the right, the bank statement showing insufficient funds, late fees, penalties compounding month after month. The room was silent. You could hear ice cracking in the champagne buckets. I clicked again. A new image filled the screen. Caroline smiling beside a white convertible with a red bow stretched across the hood, her 22nd birthday. I said, a symbol of freedom, a symbol of status. Reality, this car was never purchased. It was leased using a high-interest home equity line of credit taken out against the same property she was just gifted. Interest rate, 11.9%. Principal untouched for 4 years. The balance has only grown. I looked at Caroline. She wasn't watching the screen. She was staring at her parents, her face tightening with confusion. She thought this was cruelty. She didn't realize it was a rescue mission. I clicked once more. The notice of default returned, magnified. I said, and this brings us to the gift, the Marshview estate. My father called it a legacy. Let's call it what it is. The property is leveraged with $240,000 in undisclosed equity loans. It is in pre-foreclosure. There is a balloon payment of $8,400 due in exactly 60 days. Caroline's hands began to shake. She clutched Grant's arm, knuckles white. I said, they are not giving you a house. They are transferring liability. Their credit is destroyed. They need a clean name to refinance before the bank seizes the property. You aren't the heir, you're the proxy. That's a lie, Elaine screamed, her voice sharp and cracking as she rushed forward, heels slipping on the polished floor. She's lying. She always has been. She wants to ruin this family because she can't stand seeing her sister happy. I didn't look at her. I kept my eyes on Caroline. The room buzzed with murmurs now, scandal whippling outward. Caroline looked down at the deed in her hand, then back at the screen. Numbers, dates. For the first time, entitlement cracked. "Is it true?" she whispered. Her voice was small. "Dad?" Richard straightened his jacket, trying to summon authority that no longer answered him. He glanced at Grant, whose family owned half of coastal South Carolina's commercial real estate. He looked toward the exit. Then he attacked. "We did this for you," he shouted, jabbing a finger at Caroline. "Every loan, every credit line, it was to give you the right life."
The right friends, the right image. And this is how you repay us? By humiliating us? The room recoiled. I stepped closer to the microphone. This was the lesson. I said, listen to him, Caroline. He isn't talking about love. He's talking about return on investment. This is the paradox of the golden child. You thought you were cherished. You were just the most expensive asset in their portfolio. I looked at the crowd, then back at my father. Psychologists call it the sunk cost of narcissism. To people like Richard and Elaine, children aren't human beings, they're mirrors. They invested in your image because they needed proof they were successful. And now that the bill is due, they expect you to pay it. That's why they gave you the house, not to protect you, but because they believe they own you. Richard's face flushed dark red. You ungrateful little witch, he yelled. You don't understand sacrifice. We gave her everything, and now you want Grant to pay for it? I cut in, my voice clean and sharp. That's the plan, isn't it? You couldn't refinance, so you transferred the deed to Caroline. She marries Grant. His name goes on the title. His credit backs the loan. His trust fund wipes out your debt. And you walk away calling it a wedding gift. I turned to my sister. She was crying silently now. I said, "You're not the heir, Caroline. You're the bait. They groomed you to depend on appearances, so when they needed a lifeboat, you wouldn't know how to swim away." Elaine collapsed into loud sobs, theatrical and hollow. No one moved to comfort her. The illusion hadn't cracked. It had been exposed as a Ponzi scheme built on their children. I clicked the remote again. The screen went dark. Then a new title appeared, The Wedding Fund. I said, the house is bad business. What comes next is a crime. This account was opened 18 months ago. Grant, you wired $50,000 to my father to secure the venue and catering. You trusted them. I looked at him. He nodded slowly. I clicked again. A bank statement appeared. Incoming wire, $50,000. The next line, outgoing transfer, $50,000. Not to a venue, not to a planner. It was sent to a shell company registered offshore. I clicked again. A document of incorporation filled the screen, tracing the shell company directly back to Richard. I said, this company exists for one purpose, laundering gambling debt. My father took your wedding money, Grant, and wired it to an offshore betting syndicate to cover losses from the last Super Bowl. The room didn't gasp. There was only a collective, horrified intake of breath. Embezzlement, fraud, theft. I said the venue was never paid with that money. I paid it. I wired the deposit myself 3 weeks later when the coordinator called to say they were releasing the date. The catering, I paid that too. The flowers, the dress, me. I turned to my mother. You let Grant believe his money was safe. You let Caroline believe her parents were generous. But the truth is, you stole from your future son-in-law to hide your husband's addiction, and you let your other daughter foot the bill to keep the lie alive. Grant stood, his chair scraping hard against the floor. He walked toward Richard, his face calm and lethal. "Where is my money?" he asked. Richard tried to laugh, a thin, sweating sound. "Now, Grant, it's complicated. It was a temporary loan. I was going to pay it back with the equity from the house once. So you stole from me to cover a gambling debt?" Grant cut in, "and then plan to use my credit to clean up the house you already mortgaged to the hilt?" Richard stammered. "It's finance. You understand leverage." "I understand theft," Grant said, "and I understand fraud." He turned to Caroline. "Did you know?" She shook her head, tears falling. "No, I swear. They told me it was a gift." I stepped in. "She didn't know. She's not the co-conspirator. She's the mark. They counted on her being too grateful to ask questions, and on you being too polite to demand receipts." Grant pulled out his phone. "I'm calling the police, then my lawyers. This wedding is off." Elaine shrieked and lunged. "Please, we can fix this. We're family." "We are not family," Grant said, stepping back. "You are criminals." The room erupted. Whispers, phones raised, exits clearing. The mayor was escorted out. The gala was rubble. Then the final crack. Caroline stood and walked toward our parents. She didn't look spoiled anymore. She looked like someone who had survived an impact. "You sold me," she said. "You didn't give me a gift. You sold me to save yourselves." Richard reached for her. "Don't touch me," she screamed, hurling the deed. It fluttered into a spill of champagne. "I hate you," she cried, "for what you did to me and for what you did to her." Richard turned toward me, eyes wild. "You ruined everything, you jealous witch." He lunged. I didn't move. 2 men in dark suits intercepted him. Quiet, efficient, prepaid. They removed him as Elaine wailed about misunderstandings no one believed. The ballroom fell into the silence that followed disaster. Caroline stood alone on the dance floor amid the wreckage. She looked at me. No hatred, just recognition. She nodded once, not thanks, an acknowledgement that the debt was cleared. I packed my laptop, unplugged the HDMI, the screen went black. The truth stayed. I walked into the cool Savannah night and didn't look back. 3 months later, morning light touched the floorboards of my new apartment. It's quiet here, the solid kind. On my laptop sat a spreadsheet I'd kept for 10 years, familyrescue.xl. Every loan, every bailout, every cover-up, a ledger of captivity. I highlighted the file, deleted it, emptied the trash. Updates come through third parties now. Richard and Elaine are out on bail, awaiting trial for felony fraud. The Marshview estate is bank-owned, stripped bare, a hollow shell like the reputation they worshipped, bankrupt in every currency that matters. Caroline works as a shift supervisor at a boutique in Brooklyn, fourth floor walk-up, roommate. She sold the designer clothes, deleted the influencer accounts. I saw her last week from a distance, eating a bagel on the sidewalk. Tired, unpolished, real. Building a life that costs only what she can afford. As for me, I'm here with a cup of coffee that tastes like freedom. If you're still holding the invisible chain, if you're the fixer, the stabilizer, the one absorbing damage so others can shine, hear this. There's peace on the other side of the bridge you burn. It won't feel like tragedy. It will feel like setting down a pack you've carried your whole life. You don't owe them your future because they gave you a past. You don't owe them your solvency because they gave you their name. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let them fall. Because as long as you're their cushion, they'll never learn to stand. And as long as you're their shadow, you'll never learn to shine. The skyline is expensive. For the first time in my life, the bill is paid in full. If this story resonated, like the video, subscribe to the channel, share it with friends who need to hear it, and comment your perspective or the key lesson you're taking away.